I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme and glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love.
Our story today is the parable of the rich fool, which deals with greed. We will discuss homeless students in New York City to introduce this parable. If you have trouble seeing the connection, hang on. We will make that connection quickly. First, let's review some statistics. New York City has approximately 1 million students attending public school. About 146,000, 1 in 8 of those students, are homeless. They define homelessness as living in a shelter, park, abandoned building, or car. The Department of Education for the City of New York created regional offices to support homeless students. Each district has a regional manager responsible for ensuring that students in temporary housing have full access to available educational resources. In September 2024, the department reported that 6 employees from the Queens district of New York City's public school system misused more than $300,000 in funds for homeless students. Staffers and their children and grandchildren used funds intended to provide educational trips for homeless students to take paid vacations. A federal grant from the National Center for Homeless Education funded the trips. Lisa Wilson, the regional manager for the office that supports homeless students in Queens, is at the center of the scandal. Investigators allege that Wilson encouraged 6 of her subordinates to bring their children or grandchildren on trips while doing the same with her own. She reportedly told them, "What happens here stays with us." The report claims Wilson forged permission slips and bypassed the Department of Education's protocols. She allegedly used an outside agency to handle travel arrangements to avoid the department's attention. A whistleblower exposed the scandal, claiming students who were supposed to go on the trips never actually attended. The result was a bunch of trips intended for homeless students that the children of staffers either partially or exclusively attended. The trips were to places like Disney World, New Orleans, Niagara Falls. They were scheduled to tour the Syracuse University campus, but only ate lunch there before visiting Niagara Falls and Broadway, where they took in Broadway shows. Why would school officials responsible for ensuring that homeless students have full access to the available opportunities replace those homeless students with their children on highly desirable trips? Greed. Today's story is the parable of the rich fool, and we will discuss greed and compassion. Let's focus on the word greed, and later we will focus on compassion. Greed is a selfish and excessive desire for more of something than is needed, such as money. First, it is a selfish desire. It's a desire to acquire more for ourselves. Second, it is a selfish desire for more than we need. So it is not just a selfish desire for more. It is also an excessive desire. The problem is people disagree on wants and needs and what is excessive. When billionaire John D. Rockefeller was asked by a reporter how much money was enough, Rockefeller replied, "Just a little more." How much more? Just a little bit more. The implication is that you can never have enough. You will always want a little more. What do you think makes people greedy? When you look at the behavior of young children, you can see that's our nature from the very beginning. If you want to find somebody who has a positive view of greed, look no further than the character Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street. Gordon Gekko's famous line was, "Greed is good." As Gekko says in the movie, greed is the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Many people have that attitude. For humanists and evolutionists, greed is the heart of who we are. They believe that greed drives the progressive agenda and the world. So from their point of view, greed is never excessive. That's not God's view, but it's Gordon Gekko's. Greed is good. Many people agree. They're willing to step on others to get what they want, just a little more. Many people like to view greed as a characteristic of the rich. When they use the word rich, they mean all those with more than they have. Greed is a problem they have. I certainly do not have that problem. I am just trying to get ahead. That is deflection. The greedy person is somebody who has more than I do. That's the greedy person. That person is trying to get more than he should have because he already has more than I do. My selfish desire is never excessive. Now compassion. Compassion is a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress and a desire to alleviate it. It's a concern for somebody else, their suffering and misfortunes. The greedy person is focused on himself and has little concern for anyone else. To him, compassion is a useless concept, a joke. Only a fool bothers with compassion. Concern is not the same as having compassion for them. Compassion is more than concern. If you have compassion for somebody, you work to improve their situation. Remember Jesus talking about the Good Samaritan. Several men walked near the injured man but did not offer any help. Were they concerned? They probably were sympathetic to his plight, but they didn't do anything. They looked upon him and said, "Yeah, poor guy. I don't have time to fool with him, but, poor guy." Compassion means having a concern and doing something about it. Jesus instructs us to show compassion to those in need and take action to address our concerns for others. Most people, Christians and non-Christians, try to achieve a balance between compassion and greed in their lives. People like having some greedy or selfish desires in their lives. We all have selfish desires, but we don't want our greed to become excessive, whatever that means. So we have some greed and say, okay, I'm willing to live with that. What about compassion? People want to be concerned about other people, but they don't want it to get in the way of living their lives. So they can look at all these people who have all these problems and feel concerned for them, but they won't do anything that interferes with their plans. They prefer not to do anything. Most people seek to balance their greed and compassion. Some, like the Gordon Geckos of the world, don't care about compassion. They forget that altogether and just go with greed. That's the essence of the evolutionary spirit. And you'll have other people who live to tend to other people's needs. Compassion is their life. You might even know someone like that, the Mother Teresas of the world. There aren't many like that. But most people, even Christians, try to find a balance that they're comfortable with. The question is, what balance does God require? Before we begin our story, the parable of the rich fool, there are some things we should consider from the Old Testament prophets. The people Jesus addresses should have had these teachings on their minds, and so should we. The first one is the prophet Micah. Micah prophesied in the last half of the 8th century before Christ, some 700 years before Jesus. Keep in mind that the Assyrians took the northern kingdom into captivity in the middle of this period of time that he's prophesying. So he prophesied to all of Israel for a while, and then just to the southern kingdom after the northern kingdom fell. But as he looked out from Jerusalem, he could see to the north that his brothers in the northern kingdom of Israel had been taken into captivity. And God is speaking to him and telling him that not only has that happened, but in 100 years or so, the southern kingdom will face the same fate. The Babylonians will take them into captivity in Babylon, and the city of Jerusalem will be burning behind them. So Micah wrote, "He has told you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you?" Obviously, the northern kingdom didn't meet God's requirements and went into captivity. What does God require of you? Micah gives 3 general principles for God's requirements. Do justice. Treat people right. Treat them well. Do right by people. Love mercy, love kindness. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. There's no room for your ego if you're walking with God. Those are the 3 general principles God requires of a person. Now, Isaiah prophesied roughly at the same time as Micah. He started a few years after Micah but ended about the same time, so he's Micah's contemporary. And Isaiah will now give specific principles for the kind of life that God desires for us. He started with an issue the people raised to God. They said, "We've fasted and done this good work for you, and you haven't rewarded us sufficiently. We can't tell that you've taken notice of all this good stuff we've done. Look how good we are. We have fasted for you, yet we're not getting sufficient reward." God responds to that through Isaiah, who says, "In your fasting, you're seeking your pleasure." Here we go again. Although the Israelites do everything through selfish desire, selfishness, and greed, they desire God's rewards for their work. They oppress all their workers. They want God to recognize their work for Him, but they refuse to acknowledge those who work for them. So there are two problems. One, you're doing everything for your satisfaction. Worshipping for your satisfaction will not please God. Two, you oppress other people. You oppress all your workers. So how do you respond to that? Isaiah says on God's behalf, "Isn't this the fast that I choose? What I want from a fast is, first of all, to stop oppressing your workers. Set them free. Let the oppressed go free. Second, share your bread with the hungry." Isaiah is becoming very practical and down to earth. This is a problem for most people because the compassion he's asking for requires action. Action that gets in the way of us living our lives the way we desire is considered to be too much. Sharing our bread with the hungry crosses that line for many people. Bring the homeless into your home. For those who need housing, bring them into your home. Feed the hungry, and clothe the naked. Give clothing to those who are in need of clothing. I'm not going to get personal with any of these actions because this is hard stuff that he's saying here. This is a fast that God can approve. We do not get to see this in action often enough. However, I had a friend who was surprised late one night when the police knocked on his door. They had with them a young man he knew from his former neighborhood in South Jackson. The young man had been picked up as a vagrant by the police in Brandon. The police had asked the young man if he knew anyone who might take him into their home. If not, they were going to put him in jail. He told the police that my friend was the only one who might take him in. So the police knocked on my friend's door to see if he would take in this young man. My friend said, "We will take him." He and his wife fed that young man, laundered his clothing, housed him for 3 days, got him better clothing at the church thrift shop, and took him to a job. How many of us would do that? What an example he set. But that's what Isaiah is saying. Feed the hungry, bring the homeless into your home, and clothe the naked. Now, that's the background from the Old Testament. When we read our parable, we ask ourselves, why is Jesus telling this story? Someone in the crowd asked him a question. He asked Jesus to do something for him. "Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." The brother is probably the older brother responsible for distributing the inheritance, and he's not doing it. That's not an unreasonable question to ask a judge. Is the brother who's raising the question motivated by greed or selfish desire? He's greedy and wants his share. He's entitled to it, right? It's his inheritance and he's entitled. Does the entitlement remove the greed? "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." How does Jesus respond? He doesn't do it. He said, "I didn't come here to divide inheritances." The following statement is important. Jesus told them, "Take care, guard against all covetousness." The word covetousness is often translated as greediness. Beware of your own greediness. Jesus said this man is asking for his inheritance and has a problem with greediness, selfish desire. That's what drives him. He wants it, and Jesus knows what the man wants for himself. Then Jesus tells the parable of the rich fool. In this parable, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. So you have a rich man who is already wealthy and getting richer. It seems like everything is going well for this particular guy. But when I read this, I remember something that Moses told the Israelites in Deuteronomy 12 as they were getting ready to enter the promised land. So these are the people who were children in Egypt or were born in the desert. They're the younger generation getting ready to go into the land. And Moses said, when you settle in the land and get houses and farms and livestock, all this wealth, beware lest you say in your heart, you don't even have to say it out loud, don't say it to yourself, by my power and the might of my right hand, I have gotten me this wealth. We're all inclined to do that, aren't we? As we are successful and things start to go our way, we think about how good and deserving we are. By my power and the might of my right hand, I have gotten me this wealth. That sounds like the rich fool, doesn't it? So this rich fool thought to himself, what will I do? I have all this stuff coming in. What am I going to do with it? And then he says, I know my barns aren't big enough. I'll build bigger barns. In other words, I will continue accumulating and holding on to all of this. I'm going to hold on to all this abundance that God has given me. One of my favorite verses is from 2 Corinthians 9. God is able to provide you with everything in abundance, every blessing in abundance. But for what reason? It's one of those so that verses I love. God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance so that you always have enough and your needs are met. Not your wants, but your needs are met. So that you always have enough of everything and may provide in abundance for every good work. That you always have enough to support others. That's why. But this rich fool, this rich man, has said, okay, I've produced all this abundance and I'm going to build bigger barns and hold on to it all. Because I haven't gotten enough yet of my own, it hasn't been sufficient. I want just a little more. The rapid growth in the storage facility business implies that many people are building bigger barns today. Isn't it likely that someone needs that stuff in the storage facility more than the owner? Besides, the owner is not likely to ever use very much of it. Then the rich fool says, I will say to my soul. Interestingly, he uses the word soul here, the eternal part of himself. I will say to my soul, soul, eat, drink, and be merry. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Enjoy all of your wealth. Do it for yourself. That is greediness. The rich fool is a Gordon Gekko. He has no room for anybody else, no compassion, and is driven by greed. God says to the man, you're a fool. You've been accumulating all this and you're planning how this will work for you and how you can enjoy it all the rest of your days. The problem is that you don't have any more days. Your soul is required of you this night. It's all over. As wise as he thought he was, it's all over. The rich fool thought he had a solution to his problem of having so much stuff he had no place to put it. He would just build bigger places. But it's all over. He would die that night. God says, you don't understand. You have made a disastrous mistake. He believed that he had the solutions, that he had it under control, and that was a disastrous mistake. This night your soul is required of you. And Jesus says that's true for all of us. All of us. Anyone who lays up his treasure for himself will be surprised. Remember what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, that you're given all of this in abundance. He gives you all this in abundance so that you have enough and can meet the needs of others. So, you are a fool if you lay up treasure for yourself and you're not rich toward God. A fool. The word fool isn't used lightly because the Sermon on the Mount warns against misusing it. But God uses it here to talk about that man and anyone who lays up treasure for himself. So what does it mean? Paul says in Colossians chapter 3, set your minds on things that are above, not things that are on earth. And if we are totally focused on our greed, or even if greed is dominant, then we have set our minds on earth and ourselves, just like the rich fool. Paul goes on to say, put to death all these earthly things. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshipping the things of this world. Put greediness to death because it is idolatry. Greed is idolatry, putting stuff above God. God is the owner of everything. We're his stewards. He owns it all. People like to talk about my possessions, my house, my car, my this, my that, but it's God's. He has entrusted it to our care. We are his stewards. He always gives us enough of everything to meet our needs and more. The abundance, what he gives us beyond our needs, is for the good works he has prepared for us to do for his glory. Have you ever had a situation where you thought you really ought to give something to somebody but just didn't feel that you had it to give? I have. And when I was in that situation, I did not think back to this. He always gives me enough in abundance for every good work. I've been given enough for that good work. It's just that I may have used it in some other way, probably in some selfish way. So, I've been a bad steward. I have misused what he has given me. I know that I have, and I suspect that you have as well. I've used some of his gifts for my personal gratification. It wasn't a need. It was something that I wanted. However, he gave it to me to use for another part of his work. Through his Spirit, he also gives us the compassion that we need, concern for others, and the strength to act. His Holy Spirit working in our lives produces that compassion if we yield to him. And it's not just the concern, but the Holy Spirit gives us the power and the willingness to act on that concern that we feel. So that's him working in us and producing compassion. What we do for ourselves will perish. What we do for God can endure forever.
I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme and glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love.